Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee.
Good afternoon. Welcome to In Session. I'm your host, Dr. Farid Holakouee, and I'll be with you for the next 2 hours here on Radio Hamra. Studio number to call in, 310-441-0555. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram or like my page on Facebook to get updates on the show or suggest topics or books for the program, and the shows are uploaded at the end of each week to my SoundCloud page and podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Again, our studio number 310-441-0555. So didn't do a show Monday because of the Persian New Year. Happy Nowruz to all the Iranians around the world who are listening. Wish you and your family all the best. So we'll be doing the books today. Before I get started from the book from last week, the book of the week for this week is The Zen of Therapy by Mark Epstein. The Zen of Therapy, Uncovering a Hidden Kindness in Life. And I've read a few books by Mark Epstein and I really like them, and this is his latest one, so thought I would check it out. Look forward to reading it and sharing it with you next week. All right, the book of the week from last week that I'll talk about today is Of Sound Mind by Nina Kraus. Of Sound Mind, How Our Brain Constructs a Meaningful Sonic World. And I've read a lot of books on neuroscience over the past few years, but this is the first one that I'd read that was devoted solely to sound, or our auditory processing. And I'm glad I'd read this book because of that. I hadn't read a book that was devoted to hearing, one of our very important senses. And Nina Kraus is a neuroscientist who has a Brain Volts lab where they are focusing on things related to auditory processing in the brain and how that works and also doesn't work. Often when we are understanding anything, but especially the human brain or how we do certain things, we often see how things work by seeing how things don't work, or when things break down, what happens or what's causing that breakdown. And when we think of our ability to hear, we recognize, or I was recognizing in this book, we sometimes forget how much has to go right, or how much we do automatically to process what we hear. You hearing my voice right now, how we're able to do that is quite remarkable, but we obviously take it for granted because you don't have to think about it. It just happens naturally or automatically. But again, when we see things break down, we start to see how delicate it truly is. And so in this book, it first talks about one of the things that's always important when we think about how we approach the world and how we think of the mind. We used to think of the mind as something that, like a computer, just calculates a bunch of things, takes in information and spits out some kind of readout or some kind of calculation. But more and more we've seen that it's much more of an interactive process. It's not just bottom up, there's also top down. So what does that mean? Bottom up means, if we're looking at, let's say, vision, it's that there's something out there, it gets projected onto my eye, onto my retina, and then it goes through all these processes, and at the end I see something in my brain, or I see something. So we used to think of that as really the only thing that was going on, this bottom-up type of a thing. But we've learned more and more that actually there's a lot of top-down things that are happening too, meaning that it's not just a one-way street. The brain is also predicting and anticipating what it's going to see based on its experience that affects what it does see. So it's a dynamic process rather than just a one-way street. So there's the bottom up, but also the top down, and they interact together. And so she describes in this book how we see the same thing when it comes to our sonic world or auditory processing. It's not just sound out there gets to our ears and then we process it and hear something. There's definitely a two-way street where our experiences will affect our expectations, which will also affect what we hear. And so sound is essentially the air vibrating in certain ways that then gets detected by our ears and becomes part of this process that then allows us to hear things, which itself is quite remarkable. And so she describes in the book different aspects of this process, starting with the ear and the outer ear and then going inward. And what has to happen is this vibration, or this the sound that's picked up as vibration in the air, has to at some point be transduced into electrical impulses, which is how our brain communicates or how our brain functions. So she goes through that whole process so you can get a detailed account of the physiology and then the neurology or neurobiology behind how we hear things. So that's interesting to see how precise and intricate it is. And it also, when we think of hearing, often if we think of hearing loss, most people, myself included, would likely think of, okay, the ear or parts of the ear that are involved, what we think of as hearing. But as she describes in the book, it can also be the parts of the brain that are related to hearing, and there's so many of them. There's a whole pathway that can be affected in some way when it comes to that as well. So we have to look at, again, that both sides. The brain can also be affected, but not just the ear. The brain can also be affected as well. So we see this dynamic process, as I mentioned, in trying to understand hearing. It helps us see that the sonic world is much more complicated than I definitely had thought myself. Now, how can we understand what's going on in the brain? Because what's fascinating is, although we might think, well, we all hear the same thing, what she has found and other neuroscientists have found is that we all will hear something slightly differently. We have different signatures in how we even respond and hear things. And they've come up with an incredible way of measuring what we hear, and it's quite fascinating, and I invite you to go online and check it out, where we can try to understand or hear back what the brain is hearing. And so she's been involved in that research as well, that they put electrodes on the scalp, and doing that they are able to measure what is called a frequency following response, FFR. And so this response essentially reflects what the brain is hearing. And so what's amazing is that she plays, for example, Amazing Grace for the individuals to listen to. And using these electrodes, they measure the brain activity and they play it back, and it sounds something like that same thing, which is incredible. So they hear something like the brain response, which is playing back the sound. And then they show two different people playing back that same thing, and it's slightly different. So we see that although what they're hearing is similar, it might actually sound a little bit different person to person, which is quite fascinating. But hearing that this is what the brain is producing, it was remarkable for me. So I was fascinated by that. So that's a thing that I did not know about, the frequency following response, which actually allows for us to hear what the brain is hearing. Now, she goes through different topics and trying to understand the connections between that and hearing and how we can understand them. One of them is music. So we often think of music as being good for lots of things, but we can also see how it affects the way our brain hears certain things. And so essentially when you become a musician, and it could be your voice or you play an instrument, it affects the ways you hear, that you actually hear things a little bit more clearly. So you hear sounds in a certain way that make it easier for you to hear certain things. Not only that, music can contribute to language abilities, because there's a connection there of how we hear and how we process and produce sounds, and could then learn to talk and also read. So they find in students who play a musical instrument, they actually do better in reading and language as well. So another reason to encourage your kids, emphasis on encourage, not force, but encourage your kids to get involved in a musical instrument and to play it consistently, to play it for some time, to get some of these benefits along with others as well. She also talked about bilingualism, learning more than one language. And I remember years ago hearing a lot more about the negatives of being bilingual, that people thought maybe it's confusing for a child. And most of the research does not point to this confusion. There are some indications that it could affect your vocabulary in, let's say, if you only knew one language compared to knowing two, so slightly less vocabulary. Also, in some of her research, they found that if you're bilingual, at times you have a harder time picking out sounds. So if you're in a noisy environment, you might have a harder time to hear the person that you are talking to, because you'll pick up other things because you know more sounds that make language for you. So it could be a little bit confusing. But she has this diagram in the book showing that, okay, there are these two things. You might have slightly less vocabulary, some issues hearing speech in a noisy environment, but then there's a whole host of reasons why bilingualism can actually be helpful. From if you're going to learn another language, it helps. It could help with things like attention, recognizing patterns, your ability to actually stave off dementia. Sometimes they found that people who are bilingual are less likely to progress negatively if they have something like Alzheimer's. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why it's helpful. I've also seen other studies showing that it can contribute to things like creativity as well, that you can see things from a variety of perspectives. So similar to music, it actually turns up the sound in the way that you hear certain things. She also mentions athletics. So when people look at the hearing ability of athletes, we find that athletes also hear slightly better. In this case, it's actually that it turns down the noise. So anytime we're trying to see something, hear something, there's what we can consider the signal, what you're trying to get to, and then the noise. So with bilinguals and musicians, they hear the signal louder, but when it comes to athletes, the noise, the background gets turned down. And by this, it doesn't mean literally the noise, but the way that the brain is perceiving certain things. So interestingly, you might not consider athletics related to hearing and your auditory abilities, but there's research showing that athletes indeed do seem to have this lower noise, which allows them to hear slightly better. But she also does mention one downside when we look at athletics, which is that concussions, we hear about them a lot in football and other sports, that it can affect a lot of things, but also can affect your auditory brain and the way that you hear things. And so she actually describes some research and some measures that show that when someone has a concussion, it affects their auditory abilities, and this actually can even be an indicator of understanding what they are, how they're doing or how their recovery is, something that I had no idea about. And again, here, when we think about the effects of a concussion on hearing, we might first think, well, yeah, something happens and the brain gets, or the ears might get damaged in some way, which of course, if that happens, that's going to lead to hearing issues. But because hearing is not just about the ears, it's also about the brain and this whole pathway, there can also be effects that are happening on the brain level. The brain gets impacted, of course, quite literally when we're talking about a concussion. And because of that, if there's some type of damage or problems, this can contribute to hearing issues as well. So I thought that was quite interesting to see that there is this connection there. So, this book, again, is a quite interesting account on looking at the neuroscience of the way that we listen, the way that we hear things, and how it is such a dynamic process, things that I had no idea about, like these connections between the experiences we have and how they can affect how we hear things. Also, the languages we're exposed to and how that can affect how we hear things were quite fascinating. So, very interesting book on this topic of sound and how our brains process sound to hear what we hear, the things that go right, but also the things that can go wrong that help us better understand this very intricate process. It's a big part of our sensory world. All right, let's go to a commercial break. Studio number 310-441-0555. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's go to a caller. Radio Hamra, you're on the air.
Hello?
Hi, thanks for calling.
Hi, thank you so much for your time and taking my call.
Sure.
So I have just a child development question for you, and specifically about the best time to transition a young child to a new school. My son is 4 years old, and he's a very, very sensitive, highly emotional, and I would say a deeply feeling kid.
Mm-hmm.
And last year he went through a lot of changes. During COVID, we moved from the East Coast to the Bay Area so that I could be closer to my family. And I also had my second son last year. And then we enrolled my older son, to this amazing Persian immersion school in the Bay Area. And the transition last year was incredibly difficult for him. He had a really difficult time adjusting. He was just learning Farsi. And then he went back to, he just went back to school after staying home with me. And then I had my second son. So he had a hard time last year. This year he's doing well in his preschool. And my husband very much wants our kids to eventually go to Spanish immersion elementary school. And my issue right now is whether my son should go to Spanish immersion school for his last year of preschool next year or remain in his current school. His Persian school basically really recommended that we stay for one more year, just so that he has one more year of stability. Given how difficult the transition was for him last year, they worry it would be too many transitions, given that he's so sensitive. And they also said that because the way the preschool's arranged, it's from like a 3 to 5 age group. He's always been the younger kid in last year and this year, but next year he would be given the opportunity to be like a leader, a mentor, and they basically said that they think that it would boost his self-esteem and his confidence.
Okay.
But on the other hand, our issue is if knowing that my child is so emotional, maybe it is better to have him start at the school he'll eventually go to, and it might be better for him to learn that language, meet kids in that school earlier, given that he's going to go there eventually.
So tell me a bit about like what's the reason for the changing? I know you said your husband wants that. So why does he want that? What's going into that decision making?
So essentially, we believe that my children should learn essentially a second language fluently. The Persian immersion school he's at, they stopped the Persian immersion in preschool, and it doesn't go on in elementary. So we put a lot of value in him learning, and it's kind of like what you just said in your last segment right now. That learning another language, just being able to have the second language is really beneficial to you. And my husband's of the mind that Spanish is very beneficial. It's very common. It's a dominant language in California and in the world. So that's why. And the schools actually will eventually include Mandarin. So it's supposed to be for really diverse kids. It's a great school. I do want my son to eventually go to this elementary school. My question is the timing of when is a good transition for a kid that's so sensitive, that takes transition so badly.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the things we're going to have to accept, that it's probably going to be difficult no matter when you do it for him, and he will resist it or he won't like it. I think so you're saying, should you do it now or at the end of this school year?
No, should he do it for next year, or should he do it when he starts kindergarten?
I don't think there's a black and white on that I'd say for sure do it at this time or that time. The thought you have is let him have this is either basically let him have that full experience at this preschool and to be like the oldest, which has its own perks and experiences, or do we transition him to that school that he's going to be in longer, so he already gets to adjust to it sooner, basically?
Right.
Okay. And so at this point, well, let me ask you this: how does he like his current school?
So that's a good question. What's strange is it's hard, like when we're taking him to class, he keeps saying he doesn't want to go. But then when he gets to class, he runs in, he's very, at home there.
Yeah.
My mistake was I had told him ahead of time, 6 months ahead of time, that we're considering sending him to Spanish school. What does he think about that? And then after I said that, he became very obsessive with his clothing. And then what we think might have happened was he wanted to get a sense of control over something. I think he's too young maybe for me to have told him so early on that we may transition to another school. That have been very overwhelming for him. So what we noticed was after we had brought this up, he became just so obsessive with his clothing, very kind of like he had ADD a little bit, the way he was acting. So when we stopped talking about the transition, he seemed to have been calmed down a bit. And that's kind of what triggered my fear of you know what, maybe this was too soon to even transition him this early. And maybe he should have the benefit of staying somewhere where he has more stability and be able to be a leader. Well, yeah, because he is so sensitive. He doesn't have much confidence. He tends to be a follower. He's obviously younger, but I don't want to ruin the chance of him having this opportunity to feel better about himself before he goes to this new school.
Well, and the thing is, then he'll have that transition to next year. So I wouldn't make that such a big part of the decision that you're making. He's going to be likely a sensitive kid wherever he is. It seems like it's how he seems to be, how he is. Now, you bringing it up to him, was it too early? Possibly. But we do want to have kids be involved in their decision making, so I can understand you wanting to ask him to see even what he says, what's his reaction to it, because you were really unsure about that. And is your husband right now? Where is the decision at? Is your husband more for the let's have him start next year, and you want to keep him the following year?
Yeah, my husband says let's start as soon as possible to the Spanish school. I'm the Iranian one of this couple, so I prefer him to stay at the Iranian school.
Okay, yeah. And what's your husband's cultural background?
He's Eastern European.
Okay, so he prefers that. He goes to the Spanish-speaking school. I mean, is there something for you there personal about the Persian school, the Iranian school?
For me, I want it. And this is probably a topic for another call, but I'm very much into the Iranian. I'm Iranian American. I grew up in America, but I've been very attached to the Iranian culture. It means a lot to me for my kid to learn and appreciate our culture. So it's the goal. The Persian immersion school is like the perfect school in my mind of providing, Farsi immersion, learning about our culture, learning about our holidays. The food that they eat is mostly Iranian food, and so that obviously is to my benefit. It's something that I want. But even taking that a step aside, I just like the school is basically my dream school for what I want for him. Our issue with that school is that there's no language immersion in elementary school, so that's why we were planning on eventually transitioning him.
And does your husband like the school so far as what it's been? Does he like it as well?
Yeah, he does like it. I will say I think he's not Iranian American, so like all of our friends, the community tends to be Iranian. So I think he's amongst he's like an outlier amongst all these Iranians. So I think a part of him wants him to go to this other school that's very diverse and it has a lot of different ethnicities.
Yeah, there's something there that it's like, at least there, if it's a Spanish-speaking school, you'll be on equal. You and him will be equal in a way, which might be good.
Right.
Your son could have this feeling that dad is not part of this, and that that could be a bit confusing for him too. Like at the Iranian school, if your husband's the only one who's not practically the Persian, that could have an effect on how he's feeling there. Now we're seeing there's also, you're obviously thinking about your kid and worried about him, but something about you and your husband, or between you and your husband, about this cultural situation that you have, being, well, you in a way are both bicultural, I guess, also, but not being from the same cultural background. And how do you navigate that together, but especially with your kids and what you teach them, what you expose them to? This is always a challenge that you're going to have when you have any kind of difference, a religious difference, a cultural difference,
Well, yeah, I will say I now know why parents always say marry within your culture, because I didn't realize it until we got married. Until we got married, until we had children, that we had different objectives for our children.
Sure.
I will say for me, I'm very into the Iranian culture, and my husband, although he came, I came to America when I was 1. He came to America when he was 10. So but oddly, he has a less of affinity for his culture, but he's more about being very a global citizen, learning many languages. So he was open to our children learning Farsi because he appreciates more our children learning as many languages as possible. But he's more of a global mindset, whereas I'm more of I really want them to know my culture. It's very important to me that they don't completely assimilate.
Okay. So, you're saying marrying someone outside of your culture, it can be challenging. I hope you don't second guess it too much. Obviously, you are now in this situation, but it does have challenges that come up, and they do tend to come up with children. You see the same thing with religion, where people might say, well, I'm not very religious, so it doesn't matter. And then they have kids and they might feel a bit differently about what's going to be taught to the kids. What I'm hearing from you is there's this wanting to hold on to the culture, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It could be very good. But I'm wondering if you feel like you've lost, by leaving Iran and then coming to the United States, you lost your sense of that connection to it, and there's a fear of losing it. Or also, what's been the relationship with your parents and you when it comes to the Iranian culture?
Also an interesting question. I will say my parents, when we came to America, they didn't push Farsi on us. They never pushed the culture. It just was there in the background. I I ended up going to UC Berkeley where there was a lot of Iranians, so I really gravitated towards the culture in college, and then started going to Iran every summer on my own. My sister, on the other hand, is like the exact opposite of me. Like, not really interested, like probably fully Americanized. So I guess because I'm a very Iranian American, so my parents never really pushed any the culture on me. I'm coming out with of like, I wish my parents pushed it. I wish my parents like forced me to speak Farsi when I was younger. Like, I wish I could read and write Farsi really well. And all these, I guess I'm putting my own wants that I wanted, in my childhood on my children, so that like it's just there, they have it, and if they're interested in pursuing, like, enjoying the culture, they can, and I don't feel like an outcast like maybe I did in college, because I was kind of like, I kind of taught myself the culture a little bit more and got more involved in it than my parents were.
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, always parents are going to bring their own stuff, resolved and unresolved things on,
Right.
into their parenting. And so it's good to be aware of it. And you seem to have some awareness of that. Now, before you went to Berkeley, where you said it seems like you found a Persian student community that you really connected with. How was your experience in school? Did you feel like different from children? Was it hard to find and navigate between these two cultures for you? What was your experience like?
So I went to a predominantly like white school. I lived in a predominantly white community. So I just had a weird name that people made fun of me, and I Americanized it. So I never felt outcasted, because I never felt like I was not American, So so in that sense, I didn't have a hard childhood, and it was until I went to Berkeley that you obviously gravitate towards people where you have a connection. So I met a lot of other fellow Iranian Americans that had similar like upbringings. Like, I was never allowed to sleep over. They also were never allowed to sleep over. So it was like a commonality that I had. And I love that. It's like it gave me instant friends. Like, you had an instant connection just by having the same culture. And I think that's what I want for my kids, of like just this opportunity of being able to connect with other friends easily. And also my Farsi, I ultimately have an American accent when I speak, because I only started like really, I understand it 100% because my parents speak to me in Farsi, but I always responded in English, and it was only until college I started taking Farsi classes, and I really just hated my accent my whole life. So I just really, it was like very important to me that these kids learn Farsi, and that's why I had like enrolled them in this amazing Persian immersion school, so that they can, have a foundation of it.
Yeah. And so we have to be aware of how much we're, giving our kids what we didn't have, but that maybe they don't need or want, or it won't be that different for them. So you're saying when you spoke Farsi, you felt you had an accent and you didn't like that.
Yeah.
Oh, I can relate to that. And I can also relate to the name thing. So usually if I'm in a non-Persian environment, I go by Farid, which is kind of like the Americanized version of Farid, because they can't say some of those sounds. So you don't have to share your name, but I can just share that I know what that's like. Now, we're at a commercial break, but I want us to continue our conversation, because something I want you to think about is that although you're saying when you were younger, you were able to Americanize your name and felt okay about it, but then you went to Berkeley and it seems like you connected to something that you didn't realize you were disconnected from. So although you were okay before that point, you might have felt like some part of you was disowned or not connected to, and then when you did, there was this experience of, oh, what was I missing this whole time? Or what if I had this the whole time, that you might be afraid your kids won't have, but your children, of course, are in a different context than you. So let's go to a commercial break.
Okay.
We could talk a bit about these issues and then come back to the school choice topic of when the timing of that after the break, okay?
Okay, great.
All right, we'll be right back. Welcome back. Before the break, we're with a caller. Let's go back to them now. Caller, are you still there?
Hi.
Hi. Okay. So at the end, I kind of left you with some thoughts or questions to reflect on about your own experience. But what was anything I was saying resonating with your experience of disowning some parts of yourself, connecting to it, and then recognizing you wish you had that? I think you did agree with that. But tell me some of your thoughts on that, or what came up for you as I was discussing that.
Sure. So I definitely agree with what you were saying. it's not that I was. It was more that I guess I felt like an outcast, like I wasn't fully a part of the Iranian community because I I had just started speaking Farsi. I had an accent, and like I wasn't really like in the culture in that sense where we celebrated like I don't remember as a child celebrating like Shab Yalda or like Mehragan. We definitely celebrated like Nowruz and like Sizavada, but not the other holidays. So I felt like, and I started going to Iran every summer after I was in college. So I kind of felt like an outcast even in the Iranian community in a way, and I was always like very shy to speak Farsi. So I always had a feeling, and I remember when I would go to Iran, like my family members and like people in Iran would be like, "Oh, you're not really Iranian," and then you're in America and you're not really American. So you have this moment of like, what am I? No one's accepting me. But I guess when I went to college, I started taking Farsi classes. I took a lot of like Iranian poli-sci classes, and it's kind of more like I was so amazed by our culture. I was so proud of it. I like loved the food. I just loved everything about it. Farsi sounds like poetry to me, like how just like how beautiful the words are in their like literal translation. And I felt like, I missed that. And in addition, I also felt like an outcast in like the Iranian community because I wasn't fully, speaking in Farsi. I was so really shy. And I always felt like I like never got involved in a lot of like, I was like president of our Iranian club at Berkeley. I was like really involved, but I wasn't involved in, professional groups. So like as an adult, so I kind of was like, I want this for my children. I want them to have the opportunity to like get involved, connect with Iranians more, if that's something that they would want. I want to have it as an option for them.
Yes.
Whereas I felt like I was denied that. I didn't really have that as an option for me.
Yeah, what you're describing is, I think many people go through that when we're either the children of immigrants ourselves, or bicultural in some ways. I think what you said is exactly that feeling. It's like I don't belong with the Iranians in Iran or even here, and then I don't quite belong with the American or the main culture that I'm a part of. And so there is this sense of identity within ourselves, identifying within the people around us, feeling a sense of belonging, a sense of community and connection that can be hard to find. And it does seem like you didn't recognize it as much until you found it in Berkeley, where there was Iranian American. So it's hard to find that. It's people who are not quite Iranian, not quite American, that somewhere in between or have both. And you found that in like-minded people, and it must have felt so nice to have that sense of connection, that sense of community. That felt really good. Also, what you went through is something that many people will go through when they are the children of immigrants or new to culture. When you're younger, you're more connected to your parents to whatever degree, but sometimes you go away from that. But then when you get a little bit older in late adolescence and are finding your identity, you will often come back to your culture of origin or your lineage or your background. And so something in that must have been very powerful for you. And so you want that for your kids, but it's important to recognize that your kids have a different situation than you, right? So them being immersed in the Iranian culture is not the same as if you were to have been as immersed in the Iranian culture, because for one, they were born here. Now you came here when you were 1, so it's not that different, but they were born here, but also they have a father who's not Iranian. So there's definitely a difference there. And what we often do is we experience something and we try to take a lesson from it. And usually the lesson is, well, do what I wish happened to me or do the thing that worked. But we have to recognize that often the lesson is this sense for you and this sense of community rather than this sense of Iranian culture is the key to make my kids feel good, or feel, that they have something. So it's challenging because it's not that you have to not include the Persian culture in their lives, but recognizing that what's pushing you towards that is, one, you wish you had that, and so you don't want to not have that. And often parents will feel the sense like they want to feel connected to their kids, and this is one of the ways they can feel connected is through the culture. This is actually why parents have such a hard time. Iranian parents, they come here and their kids start becoming like the American kids, and they really don't like that. One, because culture is not just about preferences, it's about living a good life and being a good person. So the less you're like us and the more you're like them, the worse you're going to become, and there's all those things. But then there's also the sense that I'm losing my kids. I'm not going to be connected to them. because we won't share this culture. So you might feel a lot of those things all at once when it comes to your children, that it's important for you to be mindful of, that they're going to be there, those feelings, but you don't want to react too strongly to them, because you have to recognize your children are going to be in a very different circumstance than you are in. And that it's also very important that you and your husband are aligned and on the same page as you create this culture of the family, but also navigate the cultures and how your children will be exposed to different things. So I know that was a mouthful, but wanted to share some thoughts on the different aspects of what it seems like you're dealing with.
Well, I will say that in the Persian immersion, why I like it is, let's say half the class are children of like immigrants that came when they were like in high school, so they're like 100% Iranian. But the other half of the class are people like my son, where they're half Iranian and half something else. So I kind of, what I appreciated about that is like my children could see themselves in their classroom, right? They are half something else. They actually all look really similar too, because half Iranian, half like American kids have like a particular look. So in that sense, I like this school because of that. Whereas I'm sure my husband likes the other school more because it's more just diverse. It's more of like an international type of school where the parents are from like two different cultures like us. I think one of my, I can see this. So I have a lot of self-awareness of it. But I think like I'll see the kids in the class that are like from where both their parents are Iranian, and they're like, you could just tell these kids will grow up with a strong Iranian culture. And a part of me feels like, I know my parents always say like, you know, your children's generation, they're not going to like speak Farsi. Like, why are you putting so much effort into it? Like, their kids are definitely not going to speak Farsi, you should just kind of let it go. Like, why are you putting so much pressure? A part of me feels like I was like, it's my fault. I'm not Iranian enough. I'm not Iranian enough to pass down my culture on my own, and then like I really need the school to help me.
Well, that's so this Iranian enough, what does that make you feel about not being Iranian enough, which is itself a judgment, but what does that feel like to you?
I mean, it's not, I want to be part of that community, so it doesn't feel good when you don't feel like Iranian enough. Like, I try to speak Farsi to my kids, but I do a lot of like, Farsi English, and obviously like if I want to tell this like amazingly detailed, funny story, it's easier to say it in English, whereas in Farsi it's like a very bland story. So I have to use English a lot when I'm speaking to my kids. And in that sense, I'm like, I don't have this strong grasp of Farsi to like give them this language, that I need this immersion school to like have 8 hours of Farsi so that my children can speak Farsi. I have like an understanding of it. Whereas, like, I see like fellow classmates, like even when one parent is Iranian and one is not, that one parent is constantly speaking Farsi because they're from Iran coming in, and they speak Farsi really well, and their kid understands and speaks Farsi really well. And in that sense, I'm like, okay, well, I don't measure well against them because my Farsi is not that great. But I think I counterbalance it with like being really into the culture, like really celebrating the holidays, like just doing as much as I can that's relating to anything Iranian related for these kids. I may be pushing it kind of down their throat.
Well, a bit, maybe, maybe with Osh, if you're pushing it down their throat, somehow you're finding a way to get it to them. But there is this way that you're talking in a very Iranian culture, good, lack of it, bad kind of a way, and also judging yourself like, you're too diluted to then pass down more of this culture to your kids. If you had it more, you'd be passing down more. But we can see there's this strong bias towards the Iranian culture being so good. And if your kids don't have it, they're missing something is lacking. And because of that, you're lacking in some way because you didn't have the capacity to pass it on as strongly to your kids. And so culture does tend to give us this feeling that the way we're doing things is right and good. And then when we have traditions and customs, they feel really good because they connect us with others. They bring back memories. They bring back this feeling of home and all these things that we want for our kids to have. But really, the way I would look at it is that there's no culture that has the winning way of doing it. So another culture, they'll celebrate a holiday in this day. And it doesn't mean their holiday is not good and, Nowruz is special. It's that to you won't feel anything about their holiday because there is no connection to it. So the things that your children are going to experience don't have to be a certain set of things, that these are the right ways to feel connected and to feel good. What I think is really actually important is that you and your husband with your kids create your own experiences that you all share together. So it could even be that having the Iranian would make it a little bit more disconnected because your husband won't be as involved, rather than if it's things you, the four of you, I guess, for now, in the nuclear family share together in some way could be important to have. So it does seem like it's so hard to untangle this feeling we have to certain experiences, and it can feel so deep and so connected to how we emotionally experience things, but it can bias us to think that the Iranian culture is going to be the one, and anything, however, whatever less they get of the Iranian culture, like you're almost hurting your kids or depriving your kids. I do think you felt that way because, your kids are going to be less Iranian than you, and they probably should be. It makes sense for them to be. They have a father that's not Iranian, and that should be a big part of who they are too. So I'm feeling, now again, the timing of the school, though, does not necessarily mean you have to get him out of that school immediately. This to me is actually bigger picture things that it's important for you and your partner to communicate about, connect about. And I think for you to see that I want my kids to have a culture that makes them feel connected to us. And yes, maybe to their grandparents, but they have two sets of grandparents. So how are we going to navigate that? But finding that way and recognizing that the way that seems right to you is because that was right for you, but not necessarily for them.
That's a good point.
So
I will say I have like a somewhat awareness of like that it's a lot of this is like what I want, because I have a lot of friends that say like, oh, you want your child to learn Farsi, then you improve your Farsi and speak to him, and that's it. Like that's what you should do. Like it's me that should change, right? Not like enforce this change on them. And I have started speaking more Farsi to them at home. I'm very open to my husband's culture as well, and I do always see from what I've gauged that when kids are multicultural, if one culture is being pushed down their throat but the other one isn't, they tend to move towards that other one. So I feel like I'm
But you know what? In what you're even saying there, it's like this. Okay, I don't want to make them go away from the Iranian. There's still a strategy there, which I could, So you're like, wait a second. I actually have to embrace that one enough where they actually embrace the Iranian one even stronger. So
you caught me. Yeah.
Not trying to catch you, but I want you to notice it yourself. There's such a strong bias towards this. The Iranian is good, and I'm sure a lot of people listening, especially if the show is in Farsi right now, would be agreeing with that. But I think it's realizing that that's not really the case, and your kids, being more Iranian might not even help them or be good for them. Not that I'm saying they shouldn't be, but the way you might want them to break, they're living in this country and they're going to be exposed to different things, and the fear is like when you're saying, or like their kids, let's say, won't be. Your parents said that to you, and that's probably true. Or you go further down, and that. It does create an emotional reaction if something is being lost, and also something's being lost in our connection and our, lots of these things. But really, that's how the world is. Just like even if we look at from a technological way of doing things, you do things very differently than your parents and grandparents. These things change and evolve based on the world we now find ourselves in. So we want your kids to do well in their present day and their future. And the Iranian culture can be part of that. It's not that I'm against it, but really recognizing that there seems to be a lot of your own experience, which you do have some awareness, I can tell by the way you talk about it. But you'll probably have to go a little bit deeper into that of understanding what did it feel like to you? Or did you feel upset with your parents? I think you mentioned something along those lines of not sharing more of that or pushing that. And so now your reaction is to do that to your kids, but it might not be beneficial. It's like you're trying to heal a wound before that's not even there because it was within you, So there could be some things worth looking at there of exploring that. Now, I want to wrap up. We're at another commercial break, but let's just look at this school timing. To me, there's not a black and white about it. What I would, ask for you to do is to reflect on these things that we've talked about now, so that the cultural pieces, it's going to be a longer process, and I know you might have to make a decision sooner, but to reflect a bit on like how much am I pushing this for this reason. Of course, the school is going to say for him to stay at the school. Like unlikely they're going to say, no, leave the school and go somewhere else. Yeah. Not that I'm saying they have bad intentions, but their preference and they think it makes sense. Let him finish the program we have here, preschool, which could make sense. But I'm not going to make this decision for you, and I don't even want you just to make it. I want you and your husband to discuss it. With your child, it's tough because if you ask him, more than likely he doesn't want change. So it's
Right.
unlikely he's also going to say, yeah, no, I want to change schools, unless something really bad happens in these last couple of months
Right.
that he doesn't like. So it's tough that we don't want to just make it for him without him being involved. But we also want to recognize that if we ask him, this is different, but it reminds me of I work with families. Like, well, I asked my 6-year-old if he wants us to get divorced, and he said no. I'm like, well, of
Yeah.
course a 6-year-old is going to say no, unless, again,
Yeah.
things are so bad and they recognize that. So we have to be aware of how we involve him because of his age, that he probably will just say keep things the same. But that's something for you and your husband to figure out. But I hope you'll take a deeper look at these things. They're going to come up with him and, of course, your other child as well. And I think it's important for you and your husband together with the family to create a culture that is your own, that won't be Persian, it won't be American, it won't be, his Eastern European only. It'll be a blend of those things. That is really the only thing that we can have. But I appreciate you calling, and it was nice talking to you.
Thank you. It was very nice talking to you. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Have a good day.
Bye.
All right. 04410555. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's go to another caller. Radio Hamra, you're on the air. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for calling.
Hi. Thanks for talking to me, Doctor.
Sure.
I'm calling from the East Coast. I'm 26 years old. I've been pretty kind of a go-getter sort of my whole life, so I never really focused too much on relationships and just thought that part of my life would kind of figure itself out at some point. So I ended up going to a really top university in the Northeast, and I stayed in the Northeast, moved to New York City for med school, and I'm now going to residency at my top choice, also in the Northeast. And in the 6.5 months, the previous 6.5 months, I met someone, and, we've been dating really seriously. He's my first boyfriend that I've, ever really had, because I come from a pretty traditional Iranian household, and also was born in Iran and everything. But we moved here when I was 7. So me and my boyfriend, we really connected early on because we both went to the same undergrad. We didn't know each other because he was 2 years ahead of me. But we really connected on like a similar immigrant story. He's an immigrant from Europe with his parents, and I kind of felt like he saw the world in a way that I was like hoping I would find someone to like see the world that way with me. And I really just felt like our relationship was going really well. We traveled together to go to one of his family members' weddings in Europe, and then ended up spending like 2 weeks there together. My parents met him and like absolutely love him, and I also, met his entire family, and they like were welcoming to me, and I never felt like out of place with them at all. So everything was going well. We spent a lot of time together in the first 4 months, but in the past, I guess, 2 months, when things kind of died down a little bit more with med school, I had more time to spend with him where he lives, and I kind of noticed that, at certain points, like he was drinking throughout the day, and drinking is not a big part of my life. I mean, I have a lot of friends that drink, and my parents don't drink at all, but it really just like the first time that I saw that he was drinking throughout the day, and like he works from home, it really, really like just terrified me, and I was like, he's kind of trying to hide it as well. Like he was putting it in the fridge and then would take it out in the middle of the day and not really like show me, like take it up to like his office and not really show me. And I thought, okay, like maybe this is just like some leftover beers that he had in the house or whatever. But then like as the days went on, like whenever he would have a bad day at work or a good day at work, like his go-to almost always seemed to be to go to like a local bar and sit there and just like one day I came back from a doctor's appointment and I found him, he wasn't home and it was like 5:30 p.m. and I was so excited to like make food together, watch a movie or something like that, but unfortunately, like I called him and he wasn't there, and he was like, oh, like I'm at such and such place, the name of the bar that he sometimes went to. So I guess like in the past 2 months I've noticed that it's more something that he uses to cope with like something not going well, or I should also mention that he's gone through a really traumatic experience, like about 5-6 years ago, with the loss of his brother, which was very unexpected, and he hasn't like worked with a professional as of yet to kind of like work through that. And at times, like, he's brought that as like, you know, he saw something that triggered him, and so he found like that alcohol was something that kind of helped him get through it. And we've had many conversations since then about just like the times when I felt like I was losing trust because of his drinking. Like, he would say, for example, he was leaving from my place for the weekend on a Sunday evening, and I checked in with him. He said he was home, and like he was seeing his mom later on in the evening. And so I was really surprised when I got a phone call from his mom at 12:30 a.m. Saying like, "Oh, is my son with you? Because he hasn't come home." And he said he was on the way at like 6 p.m. And I think that night, like, I was very nervous, like, even before I got the phone call, because I had a feeling, just because his communication changes whenever he's out and he's not telling me. But that night, like, he came back at 2:30 a.m. We were almost like to the point that like we were gonna call, you know, the police to go looking for him, because we're like, where could he be? Like, he's not answering his phone. Like, he told me he was home. Like, he gave me every indication that he was at home. And pretty much since that night, like, things haven't really been the same between us, because I find it really tough to trust like anything he says, especially relating to alcohol. And you know, he said like he would try to stop, but it only really lasted for 10 days, and he was supposed to come to my house, and my parents were expecting him, and unfortunately a similar thing happened like 10 days after that night, and he didn't show up, and I went to his house and I tried to end things, because it's been causing me a lot of anxiety. But obviously I love him like so much, and I don't know what the right decision is here, because like I know the kind of future that I like envision for myself, and that we kind of planned together in the past. And I just feel like in the past few months, like, I don't know, maybe this was like always a thing and I just didn't notice it. But you know, I feel like it was a perfect storm with the winter and his job not going as well as he wanted to, and just like seeing triggers of his brother. And I'm like kind of confused like what to do, because I don't want to lose him, because I feel like what if I never find something like that again? Like, what if we're really meant to be together and I need to see him through this? But at the same time, I know I need someone like really stable in my life. And because like of the nature of the work that I have to do, and that I'm, you know, for the next 4 years I'm going to be a resident, and I can't deal with like a really stressful time at home, and our plan was always to like kind of move in together in the next few months, and like I just, all of that is like falling apart to me at the moment. And so I feel very just nervous and anxious about this, and I thought maybe talking to you would help.
Sure. Well, I'm glad we're talking. There's a lot going on. I mean, there always is in a relationship, but there's definitely a lot that's happened in these last few months, especially. You know, this is why we date, because we want to see different aspects of someone. And you were more busy, and maybe he was doing better, so he could have even been drinking less, or it was easier for him to hide it. But then when you had more time and were able to see him more up close, you know, you're seeing these things that are really concerning. And there's the drinking itself, which seems concerning, and then it's created a trust issue related to the drinking, which is very, very challenging to overcome as well, when he's disappearing and, you know, hiding it and lying. And even that story you told about you and him being together all weekend, what it's making me wonder is like how he is in the relationship with you, because if he went to drink right after that, like he kind of had to drink, it's almost like this, what is he getting from the relationship? Can he handle the feelings? You know, it's almost like he was with you and then now he needs to take care of himself in some way, or he was hiding it from you, holding it back, and then now it's like this release, you know, like he's been not drinking, okay, now I'm going to go drink as much as I want because I couldn't do it in front of her. So that's concerning too, because he's not being himself with you, and not allowing himself to be himself, or he doesn't think you'll accept it. And so that's really a challenge. So I think it's good that you're thinking about it. You know, your thought about, will I ever find anyone like this or this type of connection? Obviously, we can't say you definitely will, but we definitely don't want you to stay in a relationship that's not working because we don't know if for sure you're going to find something better. You can be at a
Right.
job that's not good and it's not exactly the same, but you can be a job that's really toxic and then feel like, well, but I might not find another job, so I have to stay here. So we would never want you to stay with him because you're not sure something else is out there. We have to look at these things that are there. It seems like there's even before you said something, like even when he's feeling good, and that's often how it is with anything that becomes compulsive or gets to addiction type of level. It's not just, well, I'm sad, I need to drink. It's also, I'm happy. It's like a way of just dealing with any kind of intense feeling is to go towards that, or there's really, they'll find any excuse. It was a good day, it was a bad day, it was an average day. All of them somehow end up with like, I need a drink. So it seems like he's kind of there. So what's been his, usually they might come off as almost like excuses, but explanations about what's going on.
Yeah, so I've kind of, firstly, when you mentioned that, when we're together on the weekends, like everything just feels like perfect. Like, we don't do anything that really involves drinking. Like in the beginning of the relationship, he was really motivated because he had signed up for a marathon and all this stuff. And he really wasn't like, I'm just, I've been thinking about the beginning so much, and he really was kind of in better spirits and just taking care of himself more and like more dependable, I would say. Like this stuff like didn't really come up where he would say he was going to be somewhere and then like didn't show up and didn't pick up my calls. But then, recently when that happens, like the next day, he's always extremely apologetic. Will come to me with like, words that I need to hear to kind of like give him another chance. But also, like, when he's acutely not, when I approach him, like, while he's, like, inebriated, he sometimes will say, like, you don't know what I've been through, like, you can't tell me how to cope with, like, the loss of someone that was, like, so close to me at such a young age, like, and to me, like, that honestly does really hurt. But then he'll, like, apologize, and he'll say, like, I'm sorry, I just like drove past, the place where we had the funeral for him, and like it really triggered me. But at other times it's been that like work hasn't been going well, or one time it was that work went really well, so he was celebrating. And at some point I thought like maybe it's because it's not really a part of my culture, like my parents don't drink, like his parents don't drink, like maybe I'm just being like super sensitive to it. But the more thinking I've done and like, having the training that I do have now medically, like I do think that, I've brought up with him that like he should see someone, and he's really, gotten more open to it because he sees that like I'm very much like considering leaving this relationship as it stands right now, because I just get so anxious. Like I don't know what it is. Like if I don't hear from him for a couple hours, like I'll immediately think that like he's at somewhere and that he's gonna. One time, like he was out and he fell and like really badly injured his face, and so like to me, these like I care about him so much and I want him to get help, but I know like as I think more about it, I'm like I'm not ready to live with you, and I told him that, and he said like, but like if you loved me, wouldn't you want to be there with me to like help me get through this? And that makes me feel really bad because like I do want to, but I also have to in the next couple of months like, pick up my things and move and like.
Yeah, and that this of course you care about him, you love him, but he there has to be some reciprocation, and it has to be the right relationship. Love is necessary, but definitely not enough to make a relationship work. It's just something that's there, but it's not like, well, you love him, so it doesn't matter what happens and what he does. I know you're saying he says the right things, but he hasn't really taken the right actions from what you're sharing. And the trust has been shattered pretty bad, and that's what happens when trust gets shattered. Even if he's not doing something, even if the instances aren't that frequent, your constant feeling about him and around him, especially when you're not with him, is going to be this worry or anxiety about what's going on. And another thing we have to look at is, you said it seems like your first serious relationship. And so that can make it always harder to let go of, or to say goodbye when that's the case. So,
Yeah.
there's a lot of these factors there. So we're at a commercial break, but I want us to continue the conversation. So after the break,
Okay.
let's explore some things some more and see if we can get to some place, not necessarily where you'll make a decision, but we'll get some more clarity on what's going on. So
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and put you on
Thank
hold
you.
and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. Before the break, we're with the caller. Caller, are you still there? Hello?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, there we go. So you're talking about your relationship. It's been about 6 months, and you're 26. I'm assuming he's about 28. You said he was 2 years ahead of you in school?
Yes.
Okay. And yeah, you're concerned about his drinking and then things that are related to that. I get this sense from you, like you said, when you're with him, it's so good. I'm wondering if he's holding back his feelings from you at times. But tell me about your emotional connection and relationship, how you see things going between you and him.
Yeah, so we connected on a very deep level because I think he found that he could be really vulnerable with me and open up about things, just like about his family and about his brother especially, and like just the how he lost him about 5 years ago and how that's like kind of been going for him. And we get along like really well. We always make each other laugh, and like he's always like been there for me, like when I had to go to like an urgent care center, thought something had happened with my eye. Like he's always very, very supportive. And we were planning like trips in the next coming couple of months together, because we do really travel well together, and like we cook a lot together. We really connected on a level that I hadn't really connected with people I had been going out on dates with in the past. And he's just like very kind and thoughtful. Like he would do anything for the people that he loves. And we have talked about this issue, and I think he knows as of like 2-3 months ago that I really was concerned about the behavior that I was seeing surrounding the drinking. And so he started to go to therapy to this person that we kind of like found together. And it's been, I think, once so far, because it was kind of difficult to find an appointment with this person that we were trying to get him to. And he's really just like asking me to kind of like wait, and at the same time, like I've found like I needed a break from things more recently, because it just makes me like, whenever I see him, sometimes I doubt him, and I don't want to ask like, have you been drinking, because I feel like I can smell it on his breath, and he'll say no, and then I'm like, okay, maybe he hasn't been drinking, and it just like causes this conflict between us that I feel like it's almost better. I told him like, it's better if we take a break, like the way things are now. Like you go to therapy, you try to work it out, and like we can stay in touch. But like when I see you and like you come to visit me and I doubt you, like that makes me really anxious about like it kind of shows me that I've lost that trust in you, I've lost the faith that I had in you and the future that we wanted to build together, because we really did like want all the same things. Like we wanted to get engaged and wanted to get married. Like when I met his entire family and when we were traveling, like I stayed with them and I connected with his grandparents and his mom who lives over there, and just like everything felt supernatural, and he'll go out of his way to make sure that like I have the best time whenever we are together. And that's why I think like he started to hide the drinking more and recently, because I felt like I definitely expressed to him that this is a problem and that I can't I need to see some sort of changes. And then he would say he wanted to stop, and then I think he like realized that maybe he couldn't so easily as he thought, and he tried to hide it. I don't think it was that like when he leaves me he feels like he now needs to go take care of himself. I feel like it's the other possibility where like he can't, like he knows he doesn't want to drink around me. He said like before, like I wish I could be with you all the time because you make me feel so safe, you make me feel so whole, like whenever I'm with you, I don't even want to do any of this stuff. You're the most important thing to me. He said, like, you're the center of my world. Like, I really just want to, like, be better for you. So, like, but at the same time, I don't want him to do everything just because of me.
Yeah.
I want him to know that he needs to do it for himself too. And I think more recently he has come to that realization, because I kind of asked him a little bit more, like, when you were 5 years ago, when you were in a different city, like, what was, you know, drinking like for you then? And we sort of like went through the times when he was drinking more, and he would, later I found out that he had signed up for that marathon because he felt like he was drinking more during the pandemic, and he wanted like something else to focus on and something else to look forward to. So I think he's like may have had this issue for a while and he knew,
Yeah.
but it's sort of like he's very smart, so he can kind of hide it from the people that love him the most, and he's tried to address it on his own, but
Yeah.
it's like, I feel like if it causes a problem with your partner, then it's something that like needs to be looked at more closely, and that's what I
Yeah.
tried to get him to like come to as
Right.
well.
Well, it's not, sometimes you'll hear a term functional alcoholic, which is kind of I don't like it at times, because sometimes if someone works okay, we call them functional, but it's affecting their relationship, so it's causing dysfunctions in other places. And it does
Yeah.
seem like his drinking, it's something he doesn't have control over. He is battling it and trying to find a way. A lot of what you're describing sounds like addiction type behaviors and responses. And so it's tough to be with someone who's dealing with addiction. Now, yes, you don't drink, it's not part of your family, so that makes you even more, have feelings about him and drinking. But it does seem like it's not just your discomfort with drinking. He really does have a problem that he has to figure out. I get that there's a lot there that's, connecting you with him, the family, everything seems to be going perfectly, and then boom, all this stuff happens. And it can be really hard because you'd already started to plan your life with him. So it wasn't just the memories you had, it's also the future you had planned in your mind with him, or we're seeing unfolding. And that can be very hard to let go of. I get the sense from you that you think, you mentioned the break, but that you think that things can't continue, right now. It's hard for you, but that you don't think being with him will make sense right now. But tell me where you're at as far as that. And actually, let me ask this too, because I know when we talked quickly, I always screen the calls quickly before bringing people on. It seemed like your mom had encouraged you to call. So my thought always when a parent is pushing the call is, did the parent have an agenda? Is it your mom's agenda of, her hope that you'll end things there? That was what I was wondering. But tell me, so that's a yes on that?
So no, I think she's more in the boat of like, he's trying, like, we should give him a chance. He's trying, like, he's going to therapy, and like maybe he'll be able to turn it around. I think I needed a break because I knew that I couldn't process all the information in the emotional state that I was in, because I was just like very hurt and just literally crying all the time. So I was like, I can't even think about anything like facts wise. And
Yeah.
I tried to, and also knowing that, like, I'll have this like new big change in my life. Like, I know that I'll need all the stability I can get, and I don't really have, like, I feel like if he moves to this like city with me, and then he has like the same kind of work from home setting job, where it seemed like, in the past, like, he was working in the office and he really, really cared a lot about that job a lot more. But then in the pandemic, he had to move back home, and everything kind of got like work from home, and there was no social interaction anymore, which sounds like he started to drink more at home then. And sort of like that problem has kind of been waxing and waning, and I feel like in the past couple months it's been an acute flare of his, of the issue that's been underlying. But I'm thinking, like, I don't know what to do, because like right now we're on a break. He's going to therapy, but we'll talk at some points, like during the day, and like maybe once a day so far it's been, and he'll say like it's really hard for him to not see me all the time, and he feels like we just have this like indefinite like break, and he wants to know from me like what I want. But it's like, the break has really only been about a week, and I feel like I need more time to just process and like see his progress before I make a decision. But I know it's tough for him as well, like, and he wants answers from me now. So I don't know, like, whether I should just be like, you know, you do what's best for you and, like, stay here and do what's best for you, and we can keep in touch, and at some point, like, check in whether we want to, like, start this relationship again, like, full force, or if I should just kind of say, like, I'm not like in a place where I can really invest everything into this relationship, because I do feel like the person that I knew in the beginning of the relationship hasn't been there for a while. Like, I never felt like this in the beginning, and I'm pretty, like, a perceptive person, and I feel like I would have picked up on it, and it just, like, it does break my heart, but at the same time, like, I feel like I need to protect myself in a way, and like, I don't know what the future is going to be like, and it could be a rocky time for him, and I don't want to, like, doubt him all the time and just have us, like, be fighting all the time. And
well, the
so
thing is,
I'm more so like, I'm on a break right now, and I don't know what I want to do. And my mom's like, we should give him another chance, which is why.
Well, the we, I don't know if that we word is not good. That she's saying we should give him another chance. She's not part of giving him another chance. It's whether or not you want to give him another chance. And I think these things you're bringing up are very, very concerning. That it's important that you're taking them. You're not taking them lightly, because even the way you were describing yourself, there's like this anxiety, almost like you're, an investigator, and you're trying to catch him or figure out what he's doing, and playing detective work. And that's what happens when the trust gets damaged. You feel like, I can't take him at his word or what's going on, and this is what happens in addiction relationships. Codependency starts to form. This sense of, like, you have to take care of him, protect him, you're trying to catch him, understand him. It's just a lot. And so he seems like he's great, and you have a lot of great things going in the relationship, but this is huge. This is not just something small. And I think that, in my opinion, actually, if you do a break, it probably has to be cleaner than talking the way you are. I know that's even harder, especially initially. But this way of staying connected and talking every day, it probably doesn't allow the break to actually happen, because you're still connecting and communicating. It could be even harder. I get the sense you feel a guilt of hurting him, or giving him that space. So, but that's gonna be important for you to think about what's best for you, because if you're not in the right headspace to be in the relationship, or it's not the right relationship, it's not going to be good for him either. And it does seem like, if he's dealing with addiction, none of us likes to feel bad, of course. But there's something called frustration tolerance. How much can we handle feeling bad? And it seems like he does really bad with that. So, when he's not feeling good, he's turning to something to get rid of that. Or he's telling you, oh, this is really too hard for me. And of course it is, to not be together. But, and then it puts this pressure on you. Like, you have to almost be this drug that then takes away that bad feeling by being with him or connected to him in some way. And that's not gonna work. So I think you're better off going off with your gut. I hope your mom gives you the space to make this decision completely on your own. And not that we should give him another chance, because it's up to you of what you want to do. It seems like you have gone through your life in a certain way and taken care of things, and this is really throwing you for a loop, because you're saying it's making you more anxious. And I don't know if your work or your residency is going to pick up more, and you have to get ready for that. Were you saying you're moving because of your residency, or you already started?
So I start in July with everyone else, and I did make the decision to rank this program higher. It's not in the city that I live in now. It's like a 4-hour drive, and I just felt like, my career is something I've focused on for much longer than I've been with him, and I didn't want to, like, choose to stay in the city just because, like, it would give me easier access to him. I really was like, that was in of itself a very difficult decision to make, because I had to make that decision right around when I started to notice this was an issue. And I really just had to be honest with myself. Like, I don't know what the next 4 years holds, like, in terms of the relationship, but I do know that it's going to be, like residency is going to like really define kind of what I do with the rest of my career.
I mean, I get this. I think focusing on yourself and the residency is probably the right thing from what you're talking about. This relationship seems like it might derail you more than anything. I don't know if your mom is it some of it like a traditional, like you should get married soon kind of a mindset?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Please,
and
yeah.
I think she
Yeah.
also is like, if he's your first and like, you know, all the first, like we're with him, and like you shouldn't just throw that away, which
No, I mean, don't, that means that really I would value that. I mean, you know, do what you want with it, but don't put any value on that. That's the obviously Persian traditional mindset about that. And what is it, you know, even the value of the woman can change for them in the traditional mindset, but that has no value on who you are and who you can and will be with in the future. And I hope your mom will very much back off and give you that. I know even you talking to me now, it's kind of funny because I'm saying I hope she'll back off, but that's why we're talking right now. But and she might be regretting that too. I don't know. You can ask her. But
no, I do think like we do have boundaries with each other.
Good.
I know she was concerned because I was like, while we were on this break, like I was just, you know, very emotional and just like having a lot of like,
well, that doesn't mean, I mean,
in the day when I was like crying and stuff, and
well, that happens in any breakup. You know, this is something I also, people say, oh, I still cry, you know, 2 weeks after the breakup, so I shouldn't have done it. Well, not necessarily. You're always going to be sad after a breakup, even if it was the right decision. So we can't take your sadness to me as any indication that you should or shouldn't be with him. I'm glad, you know, in a strange way, I'm glad you're sad after a breakup of 6 months, because that means, you know, it was something meaningful and you were putting yourself in the relationship genuinely. So all those things are going to be there. Now, I was thinking we were going to wrap up, but I don't want to leave it just on this quick note. So we're going to go to a commercial break, and then we'll come back and talk for a few minutes. Okay?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We were with the caller before the break. Let's go back to them now. Caller, you still there?
Yes.
All right.
I'm still here.
And just giving you a heads up, we probably have about 8 minutes left here in this last segment before wrapping up the show. You know, we were getting into your parents' involvement and your mom. You said there is a good amount of boundaries, though, but she's encouraging you to stay, give him another chance, and likely that's due to some cultural of getting married, and also he's your first. And really, you know, I hope that, of course, everything's going to be personal to you, but that the first parts, like that, him being the first in whatever ways, really becomes not at all involved, or 0% of making this decision, because there's no reason to stay with him because he was your first, that he has to be your last, or to stay in a relationship that is not working if that's the case. So just wanted to reiterate that point. What are any kind of last thoughts as we're wrapping up here that you have, or questions that might be helpful for you as you're trying to clarify what you want to do next?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the time we spent.
Sure.
I guess, like, based on your experience, if I am to see kind of how his course with the therapist goes, like, what would be the typical timeline, or is there even a timeline where you would say, like, I could check back in with him if I do decide that I want to, like, just stay on a break and then reevaluate at the later point? Because I really don't think I can go back to the way things were, which is what he's asking for, because every time I see him, I'm reminded of, like, the times that he was being truthful, and I don't think it's good for him either, because, like you mentioned, like, I do doubt him in ways that I wish I didn't have to. And
well, so as far as, like, timeline, what would be the timeline? Well, it's tough because, you know, and also I hope he goes to individual therapy, but it's likely he's going to need more than that. You know, it seems like he's dealing with addiction, where he'll need to do something for that, whether it's some kind of AA group or some kind of supplemental or extra type of treatment, rather than just once a week individual therapy. I think, you know, the more I'm hearing you talk, it does seem like your gut is telling you that you need to step away from this, at least for now. And you know, I think it also would be good for you to step away from it, to give yourself some space to see really what you feel about it, because as long as you're connecting and communicating with him and then talking to your mom about it or other people, it's going to color the way you feel about it, because when you talk to him, it seems like it pulls on you to be like, oh, I feel bad for him, or I want to make sure he's okay. And you're going to have to let him take care of himself, whatever it is he's going through. I know it's just, he can put this pressure on you that, what, don't you want to be there with me to, like, help me get through this? But this is not something you can help him get through. He needs to help himself. And I think you need to give yourself some time, because right now, like you said, if you wait a month and then you reconnect, you're going to be so concerned that even if he tells you, he's obviously going to tell you he's fine or whatever is going on, but you're going to be back in detective mode. And that anxiety you described, that's not a relationship. That's not how you go forward with something, with that feeling of I have to, keep tabs or check, or if he tells me something, I have to double check. It seems like there's a lot that has been broken in the trust. So I get the sense you need to give yourself a good amount of space. You're starting your new residency, moving, giving yourself that space. That can also help. Just literally being in a new state and state of mind could help you get away, or at least a new city, to give some space and separation to think about this more with a cooler head, and even your feelings will be cooler, that you can really look at what you want. But I get the sense that continuing would not make sense. There's just really no way that if you continue, that trust is going to get resolved. I think you're going to have to give yourself some time to see how you feel away from him, and then decide. Give yourself a few months, because for him to deal with what he's dealing with will take more than a few months. So even to go back to that question, it's not that 8 sessions of therapy he's going to change what's happening. It's a long term thing. He has to deal with this trauma that happened with his brother losing him, and then his addiction now, which is this other issue, a big issue. These things won't disappear anytime fast or go anywhere. So I think it's very hard for you too, and I want you to focus on your feelings, because when you talk to him, you worry about him, or he shares what he's going through, but you have your own pain. And even it could be good for you to go to therapy, to look at this, work on this deeper. We had this conversation. I hope it was helpful, but in therapy, you can go way deeper and explore what's going on for yourself, not just about him, but about what else is happening, what you can learn from what's happening, and all of that. So I would highly recommend that as you're moving, or finding someone. Lots of therapists are doing virtual sessions, so if you're in the same state, you can possibly even start now, and to do that for yourself, to explore what's going on.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, it's
Thank you
really
very
tough.
much.
You're very welcome. And as I was saying, I hope you will. I understand your mom probably cares a lot and wants to help you. Other people are going to care, but it seems like you're the one that has to be in the relationship, so you know what it feels like to be in it. And as much as you care for him and thought he was going to be the one, it seems like the things that happened really, really, shattered you. It was almost a traumatic experience for yourself, going through these things that you went through.
I feel like it physically as well. Like every time I'm telling it, I just feel like the anxiety coming back. And I never really felt that way before about anything. And I'm just like, I just need to listen to my gut here.
Yeah. And I think you do. And the thing you have to also, go, this is, not to go in the other direction, but going back to how you started our conversation, you said was, kind of a go-getter, taking care of things, and really didn't pay attention to relationships. There could be a side of you that has been good at taking care of things and having control of them. But then when you go into relationships, not that it should feel completely out of control as it's getting to in this situation, but there always is that part where we have to recognize we won't have control, and that there always will be an anxiety. I think for someone like you and what you've went through when you're entering a relationship, now you're saying with him initially it wasn't there, so that's good. But something to be aware of for yourself, that at times you maybe have gotten used to being completely in control of your life and what was happening, but then in a relationship we always have a whole other person who is going to affect things.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think this being really my first experience and having a deep connection with someone like this, I really didn't know what to expect. And so in the beginning I was like, maybe this is something that I can help him or be there for him, but at some point I think it does feel like I'm putting in way more than
and you're going to get less and less. And I don't mean to cut you off just so we're almost out of time, but you're going to get less. You started getting less and less out of it, and became more about his drinking and monitoring what was going on. And the other thing I'll mention is that with some distance from this, whether it's a break or whatever it is, you'll actually be able to learn the lessons or learn things from this better. But as long as you're in this in between with him, you won't be able to actually take as much away from this experience, because you're still, the wounds are still there. They're not going to be healing. So I get the sense, especially with this transition you have, it could be a good time to put some space between you and him. Could there be some future? Yes. But for now, I would consider it better to make it a cleaner break, because the talking every day is just going to keep it, the break won't really be happening, and you're in this half relationship, which is probably going to hurt you and him, and not let you get through what you need to get through. So, it's a tough situation. Wish you all the best. It was nice talking to you, and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much, doctor.
My pleasure. Take care. All right, that brings us to the end of today's show. Thank you to all the callers and listeners. You've been listening to In Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee. Have a wonderful day.